My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 28 years old, a registered nurse at Denver General Hospital, and tonight I learned that blood does not always make a family, but loyalty should. I have been saving money for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Every extra shift, every skipped dinner out, every secondhand dress instead of something new from the mall. All of it went into a mason jar I kept hidden behind my winter coats in the bedroom closet. The jar held $4,783, enough to buy a 1976 Harley-Davidson Sportster, the exact same model my biological father used to ride before the accident that took his life when I was 7. I do not remember much about him, but I remember the sound of that engine rumbling in our driveway on Sunday mornings. I remember him lifting me onto the seat, my small hands gripping the handlebars while he steadied me from behind. I remember the smell of leather and motor oil and the way he would say, "One day, little bird, you will have wings of your own." When the Hendersons adopted me 8 months after the accident, they promised to help me stay connected to my father's memory. Margaret Henderson, who insisted I call her Mom, kept exactly 3 of his belongings: a leather jacket that still hangs in my closet, a photograph of him standing beside his bike, and a letter he wrote to me before he died that I have never been able to bring myself to read. The Hendersons gave me stability, education, and a roof over my head. They also gave me Danny, their biological son who was 5 when I arrived. Danny with his bright smile and easy charm, who never had to work summers at the ice cream shop to buy school clothes, who never had to choose between textbooks and lunch money, who never had to hear the words, "We would love to help, but money is tight this month." I do not resent Danny. I never have, but I have always understood my place in the family hierarchy, and it has never been at the top. 3 weeks ago, I found the bike, a 1976 Harley-Davidson Sportster in pristine condition, owned by an elderly man in Colorado Springs who could no longer ride. He was asking $5,000, but when I told him about my father, about the dream I had carried for 21 years, he agreed to hold it for me until my birthday. "A girl should have her wings," he said, and I heard my father's voice in those words. My birthday is today, October 15th. I plan to drive to Colorado Springs after the family dinner, hand over the cash, and ride home on the bike that would finally connect me to the man I barely remember, but have never stopped missing. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into the Henderson house and saw the giant blue bow tied around the oak tree in the front yard. Margaret stood in the doorway wearing her best dress, the one she saves for Christmas and Easter, beaming like she had won the lottery. "Sarah, honey, you are right on time," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of vanilla perfume and nervous excitement. "We have such a wonderful surprise for you tonight." The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind we only used when Margaret's sister visited from California. Candles flickered in the center, surrounded by a spread that looked more like Thanksgiving than a simple birthday dinner. Danny sat at the head of the table, which struck me as odd since it was my birthday, wearing a button-down shirt I had never seen before, and a grin that seemed too wide for his face. "There she is," said Bob Henderson, Margaret's husband, rising from his chair to give me the same careful hug he had been giving me for 20 years. Not cold, but not quite warm either. The hug of a man who cared about me, but had never forgotten I was not really his daughter, the birthday girl herself. I took my usual seat at the side of the table, the one that gave me a clear view of the kitchen, but positioned me slightly outside the main conversation flow. Danny launched into a story about his new job at the marketing firm downtown, his first real position since graduating from Colorado State University 6 months ago. Margaret and Bob hung on every word, asking questions about his coworkers, his projects, his plans for advancement. "And the best part," Danny said, cutting into his steak, "is that I will finally be able to pay you guys back for everything. The tuition, the apartment deposit, the car payments, all of it. You do not owe us anything," Margaret said quickly. "We invested in your future because we believe in you." I focused on my mashed potatoes, trying not to think about the $43,000 in student loans I was still paying off from nursing school, or the 10-year-old Honda Civic sitting in their driveway that I had bought myself with money earned from working double shifts at the hospital. "Sarah," Bob said, turning his attention to me with the same polite interest he might show a house guest. "How are things at the hospital? Still working nights?" "Some nights," I said. "I picked up extra shifts this month to save for something special." "That is wonderful, honey," Margaret said, but her eyes had already drifted back to Danny, who was describing his new apartment in downtown Denver with the exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. We finished dinner with small talk about the weather, the Broncos football season, and Margaret's book club. Then came the cake, a chocolate layer cake from the grocery store bakery with "Happy Birthday, Sarah" written in blue frosting. 29 candles, which I blew out while making the same wish I had made every year for the past 2 decades, that I would find my place in this family, that I would finally feel like I belonged. "Time for presents," Margaret announced, clapping her hands together like she was directing a school play. Bob disappeared into the garage and returned with a small wrapped box. Inside was a gift card to Target for $50, and a card signed "Love, Mom and Dad" in Margaret's careful handwriting. Danny handed me a bottle of perfume from the drugstore, still wearing the price sticker. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. They did not owe me anything, and I had learned long ago not to expect much. "But wait," Margaret said, her voice rising with excitement. "We have one more surprise." She looked at Danny, who was practically vibrating in his chair. Bob nodded toward the back door. "Why do not you go take a look in the backyard, sweetheart?" Margaret said to Danny. Not to me, to Danny. I followed them outside, confusion growing as we walked past Margaret's vegetable garden toward the detached garage. Bob produced a set of keys from his pocket and unlocked the side door. "Ta-da," he said, pulling the door open. Inside, parked where Bob's workbench used to be, sat a 1976 Harley-Davidson Sportster. The same year, the same model, the same deep blue paint job as the one I had been saving to buy, the one I was supposed to pick up in 3 hours. Danny let out a whoop of excitement and rushed toward the bike, running his hands over the chrome handlebars and leather seat, like he was caressing something sacred. "I cannot believe it," he said. "This is incredible. This is the best graduation gift ever." Graduation gift. "We know how much you have always wanted a motorcycle," Margaret said, beaming at Danny. "And now that you have a good job and can afford the insurance, we thought it was time. Always wanted a motorcycle." Danny had never mentioned motorcycles once in the 20 years I had known him. He drove a lifted pickup truck that Bob had co-signed for and spent his weekends playing video games in his apartment. "How did you find it?" Danny asked, swinging his leg over the seat like he owned it. "Bob found it in Colorado Springs," Margaret said. "The seller was asking $5,000, but we talked him down to $4,500. My knees went weak. The same bike, the same seller, the same man who had promised to hold it for me until my birthday, who had looked me in the eyes and said a girl should have her wings. This is amazing," Danny said, gripping the handlebars. "I am going to take it out tomorrow, maybe ride up to Boulder. Just be careful," Margaret said, "and wear a helmet." I stood there watching my brother sit on my father's bike, listening to my adoptive parents shower him with congratulations for receiving a gift that should have been mine, and felt something crack inside me like thin ice under too much weight. "Sarah, are you okay?" Bob asked. "You look pale." I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them about the money in the mason jar, about the cellar in Colorado Springs, about the promise I had kept to myself for 21 years. But the words would not come. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I have a headache. I think I should go home." "Oh, honey," Margaret said, finally looking at me with something resembling concern. "Do you want some aspirin?" "No, thank you. I just need to rest." I made it to my car before the tears started. Sitting in the driveway of the house where I had lived for 20 years but never quite belonged, I called the seller in Colorado Springs. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell. We spoke about the Harley-Davidson." "Oh, Sarah," he said, and I could hear the awkwardness in his voice. "I am so sorry. A family came by this afternoon with cash. They said it was for their son's graduation, and they seemed really eager. I tried calling you, but it went to voicemail." "It is okay," I said, though nothing was okay. These things happen. "If it helps," he said. "They mentioned they were from Denver. Nice folks. They said their son had always dreamed of having a bike like his father used to ride. His father. They had used my story. They had taken my words, my history, my connection to the man I barely remembered, and they had used it to buy my brother a motorcycle he had never wanted until he saw it sitting in their garage." I hung up and sat in the darkness, engine running, heat blasting, trying to process what had just happened. It was not just about the money, though. Losing $4,783 hurt. It was not just about the bike, though that particular bike had meant everything to me. It was about the realization that after 20 years of trying to earn my place in this family, I was still the afterthought. Still the one who got the leftover attention, the clearance gifts, the secondhand love. Danny had always been the priority. Danny's education, Danny's future, Danny's dreams. And now Danny had my dream too, sitting in their garage like it had always belonged to him. I drove home to my studio apartment on the east side of Denver, the one I rented because it was all I could afford on a nurse's salary after student loan payments, and the money I sent to Margaret every month to help with household expenses. I sat on my secondhand couch and stared at the photograph of my father standing beside his Harley Davidson, the only clear image I had of the man who had given me life. In the photo, he is young, maybe younger than I am now, wearing a leather jacket and jeans with confidence that seems to radiate from his smile. His hand rests on the seat of the bike, casual and familiar, like he and the machine understood each other perfectly. I had wanted to understand that feeling, and I had wanted to sit on that bike and feel connected to him, to the part of me that existed before the Hendersons, before the careful politeness and conditional love, before I learned to make myself smaller so others could be bigger. But Danny would never know what that bike really meant. To him, it was just a graduation gift, a toy, a way to look cool riding through downtown Denver. He would never see our father in the chrome reflections or hear his voice in the engine's rumble. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Margaret's number. My finger hovered over the call button for a long time before I set the phone down without dialing. What would I say? That they had bought my dream for someone else? That they had taken my story and used it to justify their purchase? That after 20 years of feeling like a guest in their home, tonight had finally shown me I was not even that important? They would not understand. Margaret would get defensive, explaining how they had only wanted to surprise Danny, how they had not known about my plans. Bob would go quiet the way he always did when family tensions rose. Danny would feel guilty, which would make everyone else uncomfortable, and somehow it would become my fault for making a scene. I had learned long ago that in the Henderson family, keeping the peace was more important than addressing the problem. Harmony mattered more than honesty. And my feelings, as always, mattered least of all. So I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the life I had built with my own hands and my own money, and I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the afterthought, done being grateful for scraps, done pretending that 20 years of polite inclusion had been enough. Tomorrow, I would start building the life I actually wanted, not the one I had been given. And if that meant disappointing the people who had never quite made room for me anyway, then so be it. Some bridges are worth burning if it means you finally get to fly. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I was not physically ill, but something inside me felt broken, in a way that went deeper than any fever or headache. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the mason jar that held the remnants of my dream. $4,783. 2 years of sacrifice reduced to a pile of bills that would now go toward something else entirely. Something that mattered to me, not to them. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Hope you are feeling better today, honey. Danny took the bike out this morning and loved it. Maybe you can go for a ride with him sometime." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. At 10:30, there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Danny standing in the hallway, helmet tucked under his arm, looking uncertain. I almost did not answer, but something made me turn the deadbolt. "Hey," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mom said you were sick." "I am fine." He glanced past me into the apartment, taking in the sparse furniture and bare walls. Danny had never visited before. In 20 years, he had never once asked to see where I lived or how I spent my days when I was not playing the role of grateful adopted daughter. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered my small living space like he was walking through a museum, careful not to touch anything. He set his helmet on my kitchen counter and turned to face me. "The bike is incredible," he said. "I mean, it rides like a dream. The guy who sold it to us said he had been planning to sell it to some nurse, but we showed up with cash and he changed his mind." There it was, confirmation of what I already knew, delivered with the casual thoughtlessness that had defined our relationship for decades. "Some nurse," I repeated. "Yeah, apparently she had some sentimental connection to that specific model or something. Kinda weird, right? I mean, a bike is a bike. A bike is a bike. 21 years of longing, of saving, of dreaming reduced to casual dismissal. I felt that crack inside me widen. "Danny," I said carefully, "did it ever occur to you that the nurse might have been me?" He blinked, confusion spreading across his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I am a nurse. I live in Denver. I had been saving money to buy that exact bike from that exact seller." The color drained from his face. "Sarah, no. You cannot be serious. I have been saving for over 2 years. I had an appointment to pick it up yesterday after dinner. That money you saw me counting? That was for the bike." He sank onto my couch, helmet sliding from his lap to the floor. "Oh God, I had no idea. Mom and Dad never said anything about you wanting a motorcycle." "Because I never told them. Because every time I have shared something important with this family, it somehow becomes about you. That is not fair." "Is it not?" I sat across from him, finally saying the words I had been holding back for 20 years. "When I got accepted into nursing school, the conversation at dinner turned into how proud they were that you had decided to major in business. When I bought this apartment, they spent the evening talking about finding you a better place closer to campus. When I got promoted to charge nurse, they celebrated by taking you out for a steak dinner because you had made the dean's list." Danny stared at his hands. "I never noticed." "Of course you did not notice. You never had to. You have been the center of their universe since the day I arrived, and everyone was so busy making sure you felt secure that no one bothered to check if I felt like I belonged." "You do belong," he said quietly. "You are my sister." "Am I?" "Because sisters do not watch their brothers get everything they ever wanted while they get leftovers and guilt trips about being grateful." Danny looked up, and for the first time in my memory, I saw genuine pain in his eyes. "Sarah, I swear I did not know about the bike. If I had known, you would have what? Told them not to buy it? Asked them to consider my feelings first for once in 20 years? He was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he said finally. "Probably not, and that makes me a terrible brother." The honesty surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, excuses, the same pattern of deflection that had characterized every difficult conversation in our family. "I have been thinking," I said, "about all the ways I have made myself smaller, so you could be bigger. All the times I stepped aside, stayed quiet, pretended not to need things so you could have them instead. I never asked you to do that. You never had to ask. It was expected. The adopted kid should be grateful. The adopted kid should not make waves. The adopted kid should understand that blood comes first, even when no one says it out loud." Danny winced. "They love you. They care about me. There is a difference." He picked up his helmet, turning it over in his hands. "What do you want me to do? I can give you the bike back." "I do not want the bike anymore." That was not entirely true. I still wanted it, wanted the connection to my father, wanted the feeling of freedom it represented. But I wanted it to be mine, because I had earned it, not because it was handed to me as an afterthought or an apology. "Then what do you want?" "I want to stop pretending that this family works the way it is. I want to stop making excuses for people who have never made room for me. And I want you to understand that your graduation present cost me more than money." Danny set the helmet on the coffee table and looked at me directly. "I am sorry, Sarah. Really, truly sorry. I know that does not fix anything, but I needed to say it. Thank you. Are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" "I do not know yet." He nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "For what it is worth, you have never been small to me. You have always been the strongest person I know. I just never thought to tell you that before." After he left, I sat in my apartment and thought about strength, about what it meant to be strong when you had no other choice, and what it meant to choose strength when you finally had options. That afternoon, I drove to Colorado Springs to meet the man who had sold my bike. His name was Robert Chen, and he lived in a modest ranch house with a detached garage that smelled like motor oil and memories. I wanted to apologize in person, I told him as we stood beside his workbench, and I wanted to understand what happened. Robert, who was probably 75 with calloused hands and kind eyes, offered me a folding chair and a cup of coffee from a thermos. "The family came around noon," he said. "Nice folks, seemed genuine. The father said his son had always dreamed of having a bike like the one his dad used to ride. Sounded familiar to me, because I had told you the same story. Exactly the same story. Word for word, almost. That is when I realized something was not right. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. They used my story. I think so. and I think maybe they did not know they were using it. Robert sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Sometimes people hear something and it sticks in their mind, becomes part of their own narrative, without them realizing it. Or sometimes people take what does not belong to them because they can. Robert studied my face. You sound like someone who has had things taken before. My whole life, in one way or another. I sold 14 motorcycles this year, Robert said. To collectors, weekend riders, kids who wanted to look cool, but you were the only one who understood what this particular bike meant. You knew its history, respected its story. He walked to a corner of the garage and pulled a tarp off something I had not noticed before. Underneath was another Harley-Davidson Sportster, this one a 1978 model in deep red with silver accents. This was my son's bike, Robert said. He died in Afghanistan 8 years ago. I have been holding on to it, telling myself I would restore it someday, but I think maybe it is time to let someone else give it new life. The bike was beautiful, clearly well-maintained despite its age. The leather seat was worn but supple, the chrome polished to a mirror shine. I cannot afford, I began. I am not selling it, Robert said. I am giving it to someone who understands that a motorcycle is not just transportation. It is connection. It is freedom. It is a way to carry the people we love with us even after they are gone. I stared at the bike, overwhelmed. Robert, I cannot accept this. My son would have liked you, he said simply. He believed in earning what you get and standing up for what you believe in. This bike deserves to be ridden by someone who gets that. That evening, I called my supervisor at the hospital and requested a transfer to the day shift. I had been working nights for 3 years, partly because the pay differential helped with my student loans, but mostly because it meant I could avoid most family gatherings and social obligations. No more hiding in the darkness. I also called my landlord and gave notice on my apartment. It was time to find a place that felt like home, not just a place to sleep between shifts. The following Sunday, I rode Robert's son's motorcycle to the Henderson house for dinner. The sound of the engine announced my arrival long before I pulled into the driveway, and by the time I had removed my helmet, the entire family was standing on the front porch. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, concern, and something that might have been fear. Sarah, she said carefully, where did you get that? I earned it. Bob stepped forward, his eyes moving from the bike to my face. Earned it how? By being honest about what I wanted instead of pretending to be grateful for whatever was left over. Danny appeared in the doorway behind them, and I saw understanding pass across his face. He had told them. Good. We need to talk, Margaret said. Inside, I took my usual seat at the side of the table, but this time I did not shrink into it. I sat straight, met their eyes, and waited for someone else to start the conversation I should have initiated years ago. Danny told us about the misunderstanding with the motorcycle, Bob said finally. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Margaret's hands fluttered nervously with her napkin. Sarah, honey, if we had known you wanted a motorcycle, we would have discussed it as a family. Would you? Or would you have found reasons why it was not practical, not safe, not suitable for someone in my position? Your position? The adopted daughter. The one who should be grateful for whatever she gets and should not ask for more. The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and Bob's jaw tightened. That is not how we see you, Margaret said. Then how do you see me? Because from where I sit, I have been the family afterthought for 20 years. The one who gets the smaller bedroom, the clearance gifts, the leftover attention after Danny's needs are met. You have never said anything, Bob said defensively. I have said plenty. You just never heard it because you were not listening. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the Notes app, where I had spent the past week documenting my memories. When I was 16, I asked if I could take a photography class instead of study hall. You said the family budget was tight, but 2 weeks later, Danny got a $500 guitar he used twice. When I was 19, I wanted to study abroad for a semester. You said it was too expensive and too risky, but you co-signed for Danny's spring break trip to Cancun that same year. Margaret was crying now, soft tears that she wiped away with trembling fingers. When I graduated nursing school, you took me to Applebee's to celebrate. When Danny graduated college, you threw a party for 50 people in the backyard and hired a caterer. We were in a different financial position by then, Bob said weakly. Were you? Or were you just more invested in celebrating Danny's achievements than mine? The silence stretched between us. filled with 20 years of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged hurt. "Sarah," Danny said quietly, "I told them about our conversation, about how you have been making yourself smaller." "And what did they say?" Margaret looked up, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "We said he was wrong. We said we have always treated you fairly. But then we thought about it," Bob continued. "Really thought about it. And we realized maybe we have not been as aware as we should have been." "Aware of what?" "Of how hard it must have been," Margaret said. "To always feel like you were proving yourself. To always feel like you had to earn your place here." I felt something loosen in my chest. A knot I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there. "I never wanted to earn my place," I said. "I just wanted to have one." Margaret stood and walked around the table, kneeling beside my chair. "You have always had a place here. Always. But I think maybe we made you feel like you had to be grateful for it, instead of helping you feel like you belonged to it." She took my hands in hers, and for the first time in 20 years, her touch felt genuinely warm. "I am sorry," she said. "We are sorry. We failed you in ways we are just beginning to understand." Bob nodded, his voice rough when he spoke. "We thought we were doing right by you, giving you stability, opportunities, a family. We never stopped to ask if you felt like you were truly part of it." "I love you," I said, and meant it. "But love is not enough if it comes with conditions. If it requires me to be smaller so others can be bigger. What do you need from us?" Danny asked. I looked around the dining room, at the family that had shaped me for better and worse, and I realized I finally knew the answer. "I need you to see me as I am, not as the role you have assigned me. I need my feelings to matter as much as everyone else's. And I need to know that when I succeed, when I fail, when I need support, I will get the same energy and attention you would give to anyone else in this family." Margaret squeezed my hands. "We can do that." "Can you?" "Because it means Danny will not always come first. It means my dreams matter as much as his. It means when I set boundaries, you respect them instead of making me feel guilty for having them." "Yes," Bob said firmly. "We can do that." 6 months later, I moved into a 2-bedroom house in the Highlands neighborhood with a garage big enough for my motorcycle, and a yard where I could plant the garden I had always wanted. Margaret helped me choose paint colors, and Bob installed new light fixtures, both of them treating the project with the same enthusiasm they had once reserved for Danny's milestones. Danny and I rode our motorcycles together on Sunday mornings, following mountain roads that twisted through evergreen forests and opened onto vistas that made us feel small in the best possible way. He never tried to make conversation about our father or ask about the significance of the ride. He just rode beside me, present and accepting, letting the experience be whatever it needed to be. The Henderson family dinners became more balanced, more genuine. Margaret started asking about my work with real interest, remembering the names of my colleagues and following up on cases I had mentioned. Bob began including me in conversations about investments and home improvements, treating my opinions as valuable rather than optional. It was not perfect. 20 years of patterns do not disappear overnight, but it was progress, and progress felt like enough. On a warm evening in May, I was working in my garden when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I did not recognize with a Colorado Springs area code. "Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes. This is David Chen, Robert's son. Well, his surviving son. I am calling about the motorcycle he gave you." My heart stopped. "Is Robert okay?" "He passed away last week. Peacefully, in his sleep. He had been talking about you quite a bit in recent months, about how much it meant to him to see his son's bike being ridden again." I sank onto my front steps, overwhelmed by grief for a man I had known for only a few hours, but who had changed my life completely. "He left something for you," David continued. "A letter, and the title to the bike, properly transferred. He wanted to make sure you knew it was truly yours." 2 days later, I drove to Colorado Springs for Robert's funeral. It was a small service, mostly elderly friends and a few relatives, but it felt right. During the eulogy, David spoke about his father's belief that the things we love should outlive us, should find their way to people who will honor their history while creating new stories. After the service, David handed me an envelope with my name written in Robert's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter that began, "Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then my bike has found its permanent home. I hope it has given you as much joy as it gave my son, and I hope you understand that some gifts are not about what we receive, but about what we choose to do with what we have been given." The letter went on to tell me about his son, Michael, about the dreams he had carried, and the courage he had shown. It talked about the importance of standing up for yourself, of refusing to accept less than you deserve, of understanding that your worth is not determined by how others choose to see you. It ended with, "You rode into my garage that day looking for a motorcycle, but I think what you were really looking for was permission to take up space in your own life. I hope you have found it. Ride safely, and remember that some people are worth fighting for, especially when that person is yourself." That evening, I rode through the mountains as the sun set behind the peaks, feeling the weight of Robert's words and the lightness of finally understanding my own worth. The bike hummed beneath me, carrying me forward into a future I was finally ready to create on my own terms. When I got home, I found Margaret sitting on my front porch with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I brought dinner," she said, gesturing to a bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. "I thought maybe we could eat in your garden and you could tell me about your day." I parked the bike in my garage and joined her on the porch, accepting the glass of wine she offered. "How was the funeral?" she asked. "Sad, but also beautiful. Robert was a good man. He changed your life. He gave me permission to change my own life." Margaret nodded, sipping her wine. "I have been thinking about permission lately, about all the ways I never gave you permission to be yourself, to want things, to take up space. You were trying to give me stability. I was trying to make you grateful. There is a difference." She turned to face me. "I was so afraid you would leave us, would decide we were not enough, that I tried to make sure you never felt entitled to more. I thought if you always felt a little uncertain, a little grateful, you would stay. I would have stayed anyway. I just would have stayed as myself instead of as the version of me you thought you needed. I know that now." We sat in comfortable silence as the evening air cooled around us. In the distance, I could hear the sound of traffic on Federal Boulevard, the hum of a city settling into night. "Sarah," Margaret said eventually, "I want you to know that you have never been an afterthought to me. You have been a gift I was afraid I did not deserve, so I held you too carefully, loved you too cautiously. And now I want to love you boldly, the way you deserve to be loved." I reached over and took her hand, feeling the calluses from her garden work and the softness of her palm. "I would like that," I said. Later that night, after Margaret had gone home and I had cleaned up the dinner dishes, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the letter my biological father had written to me before he died, the one the Hendersons had saved but I had never been able to read. The envelope was yellowed with age, my name written in handwriting I did not remember but somehow recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only a few lines. "Little bird, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are old enough to understand. The most important thing I can tell you is this. You are not responsible for making other people comfortable with your existence. You are responsible for living a life that honors the person you were meant to be. Fly high, fly free, and remember that I am always with you, in the sound of the engine and the feeling of the wind. Love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, crying not from sadness, but from recognition. Even as a dying man, my father had understood something it had taken me 28 years to learn, that my worth was not negotiable, that my dreams were not optional, that my voice deserved to be heard. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, next to the title to Robert's son's motorcycle and the spare key to my own front door, the building blocks of a life I had finally claimed as my own. Outside, a motorcycle engine rumbled to life somewhere in the neighborhood, and I smiled, knowing that whoever was riding into the darkness was carrying their own dreams, their own hopes, their own determination to be seen and heard and valued. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to be themselves, but sometimes, if you are lucky, you realize that the only permission you ever needed was your own. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find a family that learns to love you not for who they think you should be, but for who you choose to become. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived on my own terms.